Suzuki Roshi has a chapter where he says, how do you like Zazen? I think it may be better to ask, how do you like brown rice? Zazen is too big a topic. Brown rice is just right. Actually, there's not much difference. Now, if your teacher tells you that, and someone like Suzuki Roshi, during an interview when you're asking about koans, there's a koan in the book, but I'm not going to talk about that one. It's called Nansen Kills a Cat. I won't talk about that one tonight, okay? We'll talk about that one tomorrow, but it's in the booklet if you want to check it out. Nansen Kills a Cat. The cat disappeared. When I listen outside, I feel like I have somebody cheering me. Somebody likes to talk. So if you were to be asked, so how do you like meditation? You'd probably be stumped. You'd be stuck. You wouldn't know what to say. Because anything you would say would sound wrong. I like it. Well, it's definitely... You like it? I don't like it. You don't like it? It's easy. Really? It's hard. You know? What could you say about your meditation that wouldn't, as soon as it comes out of your mouth, sound wrong? You know, as soon as you speak, it sounds wrong. And then you get a sort of a hint of what Bodhidharma meant when he said, you know, the great way is a direct transmission that is beyond words and scriptures. Because as soon as you're asked like a really ordinary question about your own practice, you know, how's your practice? How's your practice? How's your meditation? How's it going? And you know that you really can't say anything. What do you say? What is there to say? And yet you have to speak. There's one of the koans, and I think it's in here, I'm not sure. Yes, it is. If you meet someone on the way, do not greet him with words and do not greet him with silence. What do? That's one of the koans. And that's the same issue here when Suzuki Roshi asks, how do you like Zazen? It's the same issue. And it's the same issue when we're keeping the precept of truthfulness. You know, not killing and not stealing and not lying and not having sex and not having intoxicants. The precept of not lying, and I was talking about, first and foremost, you shouldn't be lying to yourself. So when you answer that question, how do you like Zazen? You realize that any answer you give is a lie. Any answer. Now, it may not be an intentional lie, but it's not true. So let's not say it's a lie. Let's just say it's not true, if that makes it easier. And we start to see how almost anything we say, as soon as the moment passes, it feels not completely true anymore. And we're in a dilemma. How do we communicate and keep the precept of being really honest and truthful? Excuse me. This paradox of having enlightenment and not having realized it. having Buddha nature, but having all the human obstacles. Simultaneous, one harmony, one unity. Is the same paradox that is running through all the koans and all the teachings in Zen. Which is basically, what do you say when someone asks you, how do you like your meditation? How's your meditation going? If it's not going well, does that mean it's not going well? If it's going well, does that mean it's going well? If it's hard, does that mean you're not realized? If it's easy, does that mean you're realized? So, as soon as you open your mouth, you realize you've missed the mark. And yet we can't not. You can't greet another or yourself with words or with silence. What do? You can't sit because, it seems like a dead end. You can't not sit because life is a mess without having the quiet that you want to cultivate. So what do? So one of the Zen masters, who was the first Western teacher, Robert Aitken, and he had a center called the Diamond Center in Hawaii. It's pretty much one of the first centers. He said that Zen is dedicated not to clearing up the mystery, but to making the mystery clear. Right? So you will be very clear that it's a mystery. Okay? It's not by resolving the problem. It's not by finding a solution, but rather fully embracing the question. It's not by answering the question, but rather living the question. Because the answer necessarily, when the moment has passed, you find doesn't ring true anymore. Doesn't ring true. And mainly because you're changing. And everything around you is changing as well. You're aging, you're changing, moment by moment. We only set these parameters that we think like, okay, I can register it when it's been a year or a decade. But the art of mindfulness is to notice and to register the change in a moment. In a moment. Are you paying attention? And that's where it comes down to, don't think about zazen. Don't think about meditation. Think about brown rice. If you want to notice the change and the difference, don't think about your life over the decades or over the year. Think about what happens to brown rice when you start chewing it. Right? That's what he is suggesting. He's pointing to zazen not as this great endeavor where you're realizing the great truth. Because what the heck is that? Somebody tell me. Oh, and then as soon as you open your mouth, wrong. But brown rice. Or walking. Another chapter he says, the Zen of going to the washroom. And it's pretty much, these activities that compose most of our day, and most of our lives. That's where the realization is going to occur. When you pay attention closely to the minute change from moment to moment in one grain of rice, in one bending blade of grass, in one step on a new patch of ground, in one breath as you sit. If you haven't noticed it, is it because the breath is the same? Well, that's an impossibility. And then years pass, or days pass, or many moments pass, and we find ourselves surprised and often disturbed by how suddenly so much changed. And in our minds, we need to catch up. The other thing he continues by talking about brown rice is that you actually have to make some effort to eat brown rice. Unlike white rice, which you can kind of just put in your mouth and swallow, right? But it's not very nutritious. It's easy, but not as good for you as brown rice, which actually takes more effort to chew in order to metabolize it. Zazen. Okay? If you want the quick fix, you can find some sense of being present in easier ways. Okay? But it won't nourish your deep realization. You won't internalize it. There are lots of ways to be present, and they are beautiful and also helpful, and you can notice the change. You can sit and watch a sunset, and you can watch it every night. I just watched the moon rise. It's beautiful. It really is beautiful. And I'm very present when I watch it. But it's kind of like white rice. Okay? It does it for me. It does it for me. Brown rice, I have to work at. So, finding the momentary awareness of constant change and the unknownness of this moment, meaning I don't have any answer. I don't know what this is. Because it's changing as I look. With walking, with washing dishes, with driving a car, with talking with someone you know well. All the moment-by-moment activities that we rush through in order to get to the moonrise. You're going to have to chew your practice. You have to chew it. Otherwise, it won't become you. And as you chew, you notice that often it loses flavor. That's another very close similarity between eating brown rice and sitting zazen. At first, it's nice and calm, and you feel, yeah, I have some clarity. I can do this. A day or two passes. And for some reason, where's that flavor? Where's that original flavor? You start to get restless, you start to get bored, you start to have expectations, and then soon enough you start thinking about after the retreat, right? And before you know it, you're gone. Start to lose flavor. That's when you actually have to pay more attention. And notice the change without aversion or attachment. Yeah, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. That's the way we register our perceptions as we go through. And we touch the world through our senses. That touching usually is registered either as pleasant, unpleasant, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant, kind of neutral. But then in addition to that, we have one of the skandhas, which is I like it or I don't like it, right? Myself gets involved. And then what happens to your state of mind? If you can take a step back before the attachment and aversion happens, and you realize that that attachment and aversion is not part and parcel, it's not inherent to the pleasure and pain. It's not inherent to the nice, easy, and the difficult. Taste this. But we can only notice that if we look really closely. And you keep paying attention again and again. This is what we're trying to cultivate here. And I want to relate this to the koan that's in our collection here, which is the ordinary mind is the way. There's an extra one here if anyone needs extra few. There's like 3 extra here. If anyone needs one, there are 3 extra. Now, gentlemen, there this one. So, I want to. I'll talk more formally about koans tomorrow when we look at them in the morning. But for now, I'll just say a koan is a public record of an exchange that happened between a student and a teacher in the Zen history, usually from the 7th to the 9th century in China. Those were recorded as kind of seminal or really important exchanges that became part of the canon. They were collected in then, the 10th and 11th century and kind of codified into the exchange and the commentary on it and a poem or verse that was written afterwards. So there's the case, which is the koan. There's the commentary on it. And the commentary was originally written by the editor who collected them, which originally was Muman in the 11th century, who compiled what was called the Gateless Gate. And then he often wrote a poem afterwards. Now, in Zen history, there was what was called, I think, the Northern School and the Southern School. And those schools, it doesn't really matter, but they were divided into the school that used just sitting, shikantaza, which is just sitting and long sitting. And it was characterized by what was called gradual enlightenment. Take your whole life. Like a drop of water on a stone. After many years, the stone will be smooth. But it'll take many years. In opposition, there was the use of koans, which was the school of sudden enlightenment. And they compiled and used these as their main practice. Meaning, each student would be assigned a koan, a specific koan. And you'd have to go through all these koans, and you would be challenged by the teacher to give your answer. And basically, you'd have to exhaust all possibilities and completely give up until finally something came to you that was an intuitive and a direct expression of your realization. Not some sort of fixed answer that sounded really, smart. Because they had seen through that and they knew what that meant. Unfortunately, koan practice, like many practices, degenerated into just that, where students were learning the proper answers. And they were graduating through the school of koans to be recognized as masters just because they gave all the right answers. So in response to that, koans then fell off of use because they saw the system wasn't working until about 250 years ago. And that's where Hakuin, revitalized it in Japan. So there's this famous koan where, a teacher would come up and sit in front of the audience of monastics and just raise his finger. And that was it, and then he would leave. And during one of the interviews with a student, the student was asked to give his response to a koan, and he raised his finger, and the teacher cut off the finger. So don't copy what I say. Might be the last thing you say. All these koans and such, and there's also a lot of antics where they slap, they shout, they throw sticks, they do all sorts of crazy things, and then Zen got this reputation for being all sorts of crazy and unpredictable and stuff like that. When really, this is just sort of the drama part, okay? It's the drama. But that's not really how people acted and behaved when they were sitting and doing a lot of practice and meeting for years. Master Muman, when he was trying to open his mind to the first koan that he dealt with, which was Mu, does a dog have Buddha nature? Is a dog Buddha? Here we should ask about cats. And the answer was no, Mu, which was a negative. Now you can intellectualize it and come to all these sorts of understandings, Mu, negative, the question's wrong, or, my understanding's wrong, or the whole duality is wrong, or whatever. You can come to all these sorts of understandings. Those are all, don't work. Master Muman spent 6 years on this koan alone, 6 years. And we'll see with this koan that we're going to do, which is Ordinary Mind is the Way, what the conclusion was of it, which is very, insightful for us. Because koans had a reputation of being, okay, if it's the path of sudden enlightenment, then this koan will open my mind because it's meant to cut through sort of your concepts and your intellectual attachments. So if I can cut through it, and if I can get that answer, I will see clearly into the light. It'll like crack open all the barriers. Sounds good, but it just didn't work that way. So, in fact, the koan sudden enlightenment and the shikantaza just sitting long gradual enlightenment work together, because the koan practice took years and years. The main difference was you were working intensely with a teacher and a daily interview with that. So it was kind of like Zen psychoanalysis, you could say. Long term, seems like it's never going to end. The only difference is it's a lot cheaper. So long term, you'll get through it, but all the time you're still sitting. Right? I want to read a bit about this with you, okay? Especially case 19, and we'll get a sense of this. And I'm just going to introduce it because we're going to start actually tomorrow morning. I want us to work personally on some of these koans. That you're going to take a koan, you're going to take one as sort of your personal practice, right? And you're going to spend some time by yourself working on it. And then we're going to talk about it together. Joshu asked Nansen, the epilogue, which means at the end of the collection, that's what he wrote. You can read that on your own if you have time. Case 19. There are 2 more copies here for anyone who needs. Joshu asked Nansen, what is the way? What is the great way to be enlightened? What is the Dharma way? What is the Tao? Nansen answered, your ordinary mind. That is the way. Joshu said, can it be grasped? Nansen replied, the more you pursue, the more does it slip away. Joshu asked once more, how can you know it's the way? Nansen responded, the way does not belong to knowledge, nor does it belong to non-knowledge. Knowledge is illusion. Non-knowledge is beyond discrimination. When you get to this way without doubt, you are free, like the vastness of space, the unfathomable void. So how can you explain it by yes or no? Upon hearing this, Joshu was awakened. Now, there's a couple things I want to point out before we continue. Joshu who was considered like the highest master in the koan collections. And there are more koans, more exchanges between teacher and student, starring Joshi than anyone else. So he's really quite an amazing master. And his master is also amazing, Nansen. But Joshi seems like asking pretty normal questions. He's asking questions we should all ask. Like, what's the way? How can I get on the way? How can I become enlightened? Right? And, is it something I can learn, I can do? Can I do it? And it's my mind? What do you mean my ordinary mind? He's asking the questions we should ask if somebody said to you, oh, your ordinary mind, your mind is the great enlightened way. You'd be like, really? Then how do I deal with it? What do I do with it? He says the more you pursue it, the farther away it gets. That's part of the paradox we're dealing with. Sometimes, and in fact, you probably experience this if you've been meditating for any amount of time. Sometimes the more you practice, the more your confusion seems clear, meaning seems apparent to you. The more it seems that you have no idea what this is about. Yeah, there's some cultivation happening, and there's some settling, there's some goodness, but still, is this really working? I read an article that was interviewing practitioners who had been 30, 40 years, doing meditation. And they asked them about their practice, how's your meditation? Right? Almost all of them said, not so great. Not so encouraging. Right? If that's what you need for encouragement. But if you need sincerity, right? If you need really truthfulness, then it's encouraging. For someone to spend most of their life on a spiritual practice and to be able to admit after all that I still am not sure what I'm doing. I really don't know. To me that's pretty high. That's pretty high. And this is kind of what Nansen is saying. The more you're sure about it, knowledge is illusion here. That if you okay, that's self-knowing. That's self-knowing. Right? And so you own it. You've owned it. And as soon as you've owned it, then it's just become another part of your ego. You can be proud of yourself. Right? So these long-term practitioners were not very proud of themselves. That's what came out clearly. Did they feel then that they had wasted their time? That they'd wasted their life in a practice that doesn't work? Not at all. They were still doing it. And then he hears this, that it's, Nansen then goes to the big picture. And he says, when you get to this way without doubt, you're free like the vastness of space, unfathomable void. So how can you explain it by yes or no? Right? It's totally beyond duality. It's beyond duality when you get there. So he pulls back and tries to give him, the big picture, which everybody who's struggling needs to have. When you're in your small space and your small mind, and I'm not talking about you specifically, I'm saying everybody's mind is small mind, right? Because your personality is limited, and your conditioning, what you've grown up with, and your tastes and your education, all is limited. At some point, you have to transcend that limitation. How do you do that? You need to know that it exists, that transcendent place exists. What's in Zen, it's even called big mind, or the unconditioned. It exists that you can get beyond your personality, beyond your ego, and beyond your sense of self. You can pull back to what he says. He uses terms here that just don't have any content to them. Unfathomable, void, empty. Okay, emptiness. It doesn't mean there's nothing there. It means there's no way I can pin it down by saying yes or no. I can't give it a quality. I can't give it a word. Because then it just has, divided it. We need to frequently remember, for lack of any other term, the big picture. That is bigger than your thoughts. And you need to touch that place. Even if you're just touching that faith, you need to touch that faith when you sit now and again. Otherwise, you won't last 40 years like those people who felt like their meditation wasn't going anywhere. Because as soon as your meditation starts going nowhere, you'll say, enough, this isn't working. That's the point. It's not about it working. It's about giving yourself the opportunity to touch that place. It's not about working or not working. It's not about yes or no. Upon hearing this, Joshua was awakened. It always ends that way. We should also remember that these exchanges, as I said, with the koan practice, when someone is meeting with his teacher or her teacher and going over the koan, this could have been the result of years of interviews and interactions. Like when he says, Joshua asks Nansen, what is the way? And Nansen says, the ordinary mind is the way. He might have rung the bell and said, I'll meet you next week or next year. Like that could have been the end of the conversation. We have it condensed and edited. This could have gone on for 20 years, right? And it probably did. Because very often, a student comes into the teacher. What's your koan? Ordinary mind. Okay. Ding. You now have to go and I'll see you tomorrow, right? You can just tell by the way the person sat down that the mind is full of confusion. Okay, so keep working on it. So here we have, he finally got, acknowledged. He was awakened. And then what does Mumon's comment say? This, to me, is the, icing on the cake. Really, the icing on the cake of this koan. He says, the question Joshua asked Nansen was dissolved by a stroke. Like Nansen knew how to just cut through his attachments. After being enlightened, Joshua must further his pursuit 30 more years to exhaust that meaning. Right? He kept working on this koan for another 30 years to make sure that he really understood. Yes, he was awakened. He was awakened. But awakening is also impermanent. His awakening passed. His awakening passed. All of us have had moments of awakening. And then they pass and we're left thinking, what am I doing? Where am I going? How can I get some help here? What should I do? Remembering that awakening is remembering the void and the unfathomable big mind that Nansen reminded Joshua. He reminded him, you really got to trust the nature of your mind here. Like before you start splitting hairs, remember, you're bigger than this. You're so much bigger than this. And so is everyone. And then you can go back and, think about it. From that place, from that view, what does it mean to you? And you'll have awakenings. And you'll have development. And you'll have great retreats and great meditations and difficult ones and good times and bad times. And you'll have challenges and successes and failures. And all you got to do is you just got to keep going. Keep sitting. Keep chewing the rice. If you really want it to nourish you, at times it will be tasty, but very often it will be tasteless. And you'll think, why am I eating this? I don't even like it. Chew and swallow. Brown rice, as he says, is just right. Finally, to finish, there is the famous verse that Mumon wrote to end his koan. Hundreds of flowers in spring, the moon in autumn, cool wind in the summer and winter snow. If your mind is not clouded with unnecessary things, you are happy at any time. As Roshi said, if you don't think that you have another moment, then you will accept things as they are. Your mind is not clouded by unnecessary things that don't relate to what you're doing now. You'll have a lot of space. You'll have a lot of space. Your mind will be big enough to receive the world as it is. No matter what you experience. One of my favorite haikus by Busan is late autumn, there's joy too in loneliness. Late autumn, there's joy too in loneliness. That's the chewing. That's the big mind. That's the unity of opposites. That's the acceptance. When my mind's not clouded, yeah, it's difficult, or it's sad, or it's painful, or it's happy, or it's joyful, or it's pleasurable, or it's despairing. As Dogen said, the Dharma gate of great ease and joy, it doesn't transform the despair into happiness and pleasure, but it knows that your mind is big enough to hold them both without erasing one or the other. So keep remembering the bigness of mind. It is your nature. And then deal with the details.